I now hand over to Vikas Singh. Vikas Singh is our Joint Secretary. He is a rail fan and has interest in a large number of areas. But he is one of our finest rail enthusiasts, perhaps in the country. He will be introducing our next speaker, Vikas Singh.
Thank you, sir. It's a great pleasure to introduce the first speaker of the conference, who has been very kind enough to agree to present at this unearthly hour when it is, close to midnight there in Canada. So thank you, Matthew, for agreeing to join us in this conference. Now, Matthew Gauthier is Coordinator of Customer Services, Programming and Education at Exporail, the Canadian National Railway Museum. He has a master's degree in museum studies from the University of Montreal. He is currently working towards a PhD in education services, specializing in museum education. In his talk, Matthew will focus on the history of Exporail since its foundation in 1961, its development, and its multiple facets. In his words, Exporail delights its audiences by operating a living railway museum that informs and engages through the excellence of its museology and all its research, conservation, museological, educational, archival, and publishing activities. Now, before I hand it over to Matthew to take us through his presentation, I would also like to express heartfelt thanks to Caroline Leban, the marketing and the sales manager, who agreed to be, a part of this whole conference. Thank you, Matthew, and over to you
now. Thank you so much. Everyone can hear me?
Yeah, yes.
Good. All right, perfect. So first of all, thank you especially to Vikas, who I've been in constant communication for the past month or so, getting this all worked out. And thank you to the Rail Enthusiast Society for inviting me to present today for you guys to share a little bit of what I know and a little bit about Exporail, the Canadian Railway Museum. It's really a pleasure of ours to be presenting, even if it is indeed 12:40 in the morning. So it is quite late or quite early, depending on how you want to look at it. But it was an opportunity that we didn't want to miss. So thank you a lot for the invitation, and thank you for everybody for participating in this conference. It's really a great initiative to be sharing a passion for railways. So I'm going to share my screen. Let's see if it works. You can see my screen?
Yeah. Yes.
All right, perfect. And if I go full screen, do you see it full screen?
Not yet. We can see the we are not seeing the full screen. We're seeing just the yeah.
Okay. Sometimes my computer does that. We'll just do it this way.
Yeah, this is good. This is good.
Yeah, we'll do it that way, and it'll be and it'll be that. So yeah, like Vic has said, I'm the coordinator of customer services, programming and education at Exporail. I've been in this position only for the past 4 months. I've actually entered in November 2022. But I've been working at Exporail for the past 6 years. I started at the bottom, started as a tour guide, learned the ins and outs of museum education at Exporail. And after finishing my master's degree, I was named educator, which I developed educational programs. And when the former coordinator retired this past November, I took his position. Initially, I admit I was not a rail fan when I started working at Exporail, but over the past 6 years, playing with these big toys, it's hard to not become a rail fan. So I do consider myself to be quite the rail fan today. There we go. Before I start actually talking about Exporail, I want to show you guys this little video. It's about a minute long, and it'll give you a little teaser, if you will, of what Exporail is. So let's hope it works.
Matthew, there's no sound for this, is it?
Sorry?
There's no sound.
There's no sound.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, there's supposed to be sound. Well, we'll just skip the video
Yeah,
then.
no, that's all
No,
right.
that's
Please,
fine.
that's
Just run
fine.
it.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
okay. We can. Oh, now it's probably going to restart. Yeah. Okay. Sorry about that. All right. So that's a little bit of a teaser of what Exporail is. So we are the largest railway museum in Canada. We have the largest collection of railway vehicles in Canada, and we are amongst the largest railway museums in the world. We have a very, very big collection of railway vehicles, of artifacts, and of archival material, and I'll dig in a little bit more about that. But I wanted to show you guys this little image here. It's a little panoramic view, if you will, of the site that we have at Exporail. So that big building right in the middle of the image, that is the main pavilion that's open year round, and that visitors can really get into the railway feel. But everywhere around it is Exporail property. So if you come towards the bottom of the image, you'll have a little station that there's two little exhibits in that station that we do educational activities. And right behind it, you have a turntable, which is a functioning turntable that we use. And if you follow the tracks from the turntable, it actually brings you to our workshop where we do restoration and mechanical repairs of our vehicles directly on site. And if you go to the right of the image, you'll see there's two other bigger buildings, and those are outdoor hangars that we also store vehicles inside. Now, Exporail is not actually in Montreal. We're maybe about 20-minute car drive from Montreal. And if actually you look on the image, on the horizon to the left, you'll see there's a couple of larger buildings, taller buildings that are sticking out. That's Montreal. So we're about a 20-minute drive, like I was saying, from Montreal, which does have its logistical faults, and I'll talk a little bit about that later. But what it does permit us to have on the south shore of Montreal, or not on the island of Montreal, is it allows us to have this immense property, right, that we're able to use for the exploitation of our railway vehicles. So Exporail didn't always look like this. So I'll talk a little bit about the foundation of Exporail. Exporail is actually a private museum that is owned by the Canadian Railway Historical Association. And that was actually founded in Montreal in 1932, so 91 years ago. And it was a group of railway historians and enthusiasts, kind of like us here today, that joined together and decided to create this historical association for the preservation and conservation of Canadian railway history. And this association, started in 1932, would rapidly start to publish a magazine, a bi-monthly magazine that we see here to the right of the PowerPoint, which is called the Canadian Rail. We are now at 611 published magazines. The 612th one is coming out next week, maybe in 2 weeks. So that's been an ongoing activity since 1937, so right after the foundation of the Canadian Railway Historical Association. And starting in the 1950s, the Canadian Railway Historical Association decided that they wanted to start preserving or collecting, I should say, artifacts related to Canadian railway history and, of course, vehicles. And so they started storing these vehicles, and they would keep them in workshops and stuff like that. But as you can imagine, storing these vehicles, these are, you know, pretty big artifacts to be storing. They didn't really know what to do with them. And finally, in 1961, they were given a piece of land on the south shore of Montreal, where they could found a museum. And this museum would start in was founded in 1961, but it was really a barren piece of land. There were no tracks here. There was just the main line that was passing by. Everything had to be built from scratch, and it was a bunch of volunteers. So, you know, it was mostly done on the weekends and, you know, done in the evenings. And it took a lot of time. It actually took 4 years for these volunteers to build up Exporail to something that could resemble a museum, which would finally open in 1965 to the public. And between 1961 and 1971, so in the first 10 years, they would build a bunch of tracks. They would install the turntable, build those outdoor hangars where they would store vehicles. And like I said, all of this was completely done by volunteers, some of which are still active today. So 62 years later, some of these volunteers that were in their early 20s are still very much active today at Exporail and are really pivotal to the success of Exporail. The first main building that's going to be built here at Exporail is the lower image. You see the inauguration of Hayes Station. Hayes Station was the first major building or permanent building, I should say, that was built. And the Hayes Station was actually built because of a donation by Charles Melville Hayes's daughters. And I want you to keep that in mind, because I'm going to talk a little bit about him later in my presentation. He's super important, but also super, super interesting. So over the next years, in 1960s, 1970s, the Canadian Railway Museum is going to continue growing. It's collecting more and more vehicles. And finally, in 1978, Exporail is named the Specialized Railway Museum in Canada by the Canadian government, by the Canadian federal government. This was a huge milestone for Exporail. They were able to get financing. They were able to get bigger donations and stuff like that. So that was really, really big for Exporail, and it really pushed them to increase the size and the museological aspects of the museum. And it would take a lot of time, but finally in 2004, the main pavilion that we see in one of these images is finally inaugurated, and the Canadian Railway Museum is actually rebaptized Exporail, the Canadian Railway Museum. And in 2007, so only about 16 years ago, it was adopted by the House of Commons at the federal government that Exporail should become Canada's national railway museum, which would enable us to become a national museum, a federally run national museum governed by the federal government. Unfortunately, 16 years later, this has still not happened. Although it has been adopted, the steps going forward are extremely long. It's a very long process, and it hasn't yet happened. But we want it to happen because it would allow us a lot more financing, a lot more funding, and obviously a better preservation and better interpretation of our collection. Speaking of our collection, here's a little bit of information. We have more than 180 railway vehicles in our collection, 70 of which are on permanent display at Exporail. There are several others that are in outdoor hangars that aren't on permanent display. We have vehicles that are loaned to other railway museums throughout Canada, throughout the United States. We also had sent one to England back 10 years ago, back in 2013. So we do have vehicles that are not on Exporail's site. And we also have over 14,000 artifacts related to railway history. And this is not including archival documents or whatnot. It's only objects, so railway signs, pieces of the engine of locomotives and stuff like that. So you can imagine the amount of space that we need to be preserving 180 railway vehicles plus 14,000 objects. Some of these objects that are obviously not very small, it takes up quite a bit of space. So what I want to do next is I want to present some of the main vehicles that are in our collection. And the first one is actually the first locomotive to run or to roll in Canada. And it was called the Dorchester. And what's actually really kind of a little anecdote for right now, where I live, where I'm giving my presentation right now, I'm probably about 100 or 125 meters from the first train station where the Dorchester ran back in 1836. Now, the one that I'm showing you, the image that I'm showing you, is not the real Dorchester. Unfortunately, the original Dorchester no longer exists. It was completely dismantled in the 1850s. But this is the official replica dating from 1935, which was built for the centennial of the first railway in Canada, which was right near Montreal. Another vehicle that I would like to show you is the CPR number 1. It's the oldest vehicle that we have in our railway collection. It actually dates from 1855. And this is what we call a function car, or a private car, if you will. In this vehicle, you have a bedroom, you have a dining room, you have a living room, and you have a kitchen. And it would be rented out to these very important people that would be very important people that would be traveling throughout Canada and needed basically a home on wheels to be traveling. And one of the most important people that traveled in this vehicle is the person that we see in the image is Sir John A. Macdonald. And he is actually the first Prime Minister of Canada when Canada became an independent nation in 1867. Sir John A. Macdonald would actually use this vehicle while traveling throughout Canada for his political campaigns. Now, Sir John A. Macdonald is very controversial as a person for his views on race, but it is significant for us to be having the vehicle that he used in his inaugural and initial prime minister campaign. And so, yeah, this is a vehicle that is actually not accessible to the public, but we do open it up on special occasions. And it's really an ability for visitors to be walking through history, basically, as they walk through this vehicle. Speaking of which, another function car that we have is the CPR 38, which is also known as the Saskatchewan car. And it dates from 1883. So, I mean, we're still talking about 140 years of age. And this vehicle belonged to Sir William Cornelius Van Horne. And Van Horne was the president of Canadian Pacific when they were mandated by the Canadian government for building the transcontinental railway, or connecting the Pacific Ocean with the Atlantic Ocean. And this task was deemed basically impossible. He had 10 years to do it, and people thought he was absolutely crazy for even trying to undertake this task. Not only would he complete it in less than 10 years, he would actually complete it in less than half. He would complete it in just under 5 years. You can imagine the type of work that he put his employees through. And a lot of these employees were immigrants, and it kind of shows a little bit of his view of immigrant workforce, which wasn't that great. He underpaid them. He didn't treat them very well. They were malnourished, always undertaking the most dangerous jobs. But he did it. He got it done. And that was what was important for the Canadian government back in the 1880s. They wanted to get it done. And in that image, Van Horne is actually the person that's completely to the right. So the guy with the top hat and the beard, that was Van Horne. And he had a very particular personality. He's once quoted for having said, "I'm going to smoke everything I can smoke, drink everything I can eat, drink everything I can drink and eat everything I can eat, and the rest I really don't care about. Which is kind of a weird thing to say, but that was a little bit of the personality that he was. He was an amateur violinist. He was a geologist, and obviously the president of the Canadian Pacific. Now, I mentioned a little bit about his race relations, and that was very true for his railway workers. But if you look on the vehicle and that image to the right, you'll see that there's a person that's sticking out of the vehicle, and that is Jimmy French. Jimmy French was Van Horn's personal steward. He was an African American. And the relationship between him and Van Horn was very special. They were actually very, very good friends. And Van Horn imposed upon all his visitors in this vehicle to respect Mr. Jimmy French, like Van Horn respected him. So although he was quite controversial with his railway workers, building the rails, his relationship with his African-American steward was quite progressive at the time. And this archival image is the only image that exists, or at least to our knowledge here at Exporail, that exists of Jimmy French. It's the only photo that we have of this, of Van Horn's steward. Another vehicle that I want to talk about is the CNR 63. This vehicle dates from 1897, so a little bit more recent than the Saskatchewan. And it belonged to Charles Melville Hayes. He was the president of Grand Trunk Canada, which was the main competitor of Canadian Pacific at the time. And as I mentioned earlier, I was talking about Hayes Station and how Hayes's daughters donated money for the construction of this station. Well, it's because Charles Melville Hayes was unfortunately no longer alive to be able to make that donation. In 1912, he's actually going to make a voyage all the way to England, where he's going to meet a guy by the name of Joseph Bruce Ismay, who was who worked for the White Star Company, which are the builders of the Titanic. Charles Melville Hayes will receive tickets aboard the Titanic. I don't think I need to go into details about what happened to the Titanic. Unfortunately, Charles Melville Hayes will pass away in the sinking of the Titanic. And we were only able to identify his body, which was found in the water, due to his pocket watch that had his name engraved behind it. So they were able to recover his body. It was this car, the CNR 63, that went all the way to Halifax to recuperate his body, brought him back to Montreal, where he's now buried, and his pocket watch is now part of Exporail's collection. So one of those 14,000 objects in our collection, well, you have Charles Melville Hayes's pocket watch. So a very prized possession of ours that we do not display. We don't put it in display case. We don't allow people to touch it. In fact, I've only seen it once. So it's one of our prized possessions here at Exporail. Another vehicle that I would like to talk a little bit about is the CPR 51 school car. And it's one of the only school cars in Canada that still exists. The rest were transformed, were recycled. And what school cars are exactly that. It was a school on a train. And this would be used in villages that were far away from, Montreal or Ottawa or Toronto, basically mining villages and stuff like that, where they wanted the kids to have access to education. So between 1921 and 1967, the Canadian government is going to fund the Canadian Pacific and Canadian National, which were the two main railway companies in Canada in the 1900s, and still are today, by the way. They're going to fund these companies to allow kids to go to school in school cars. And what's really special about our vehicle is, like I said, it's one of the only remaining ones that still exist that wasn't recycled for other uses. And when the school car was given to us, it was given exactly the way it is, as shown in the photo. So books, beds, chalk, it's all original. The only thing that we changed was the writing on the chalkboard to the right. We put a little description on it, but the rest everything was there. So the desks, the games, the manual calculators, everything is original from the time. And that's a very, very cool thing to have as part of our collection. And because it's one of the only remaining vehicles, school cars existing in Canada, we do not allow the public to go in it, except on very, very special occasions. The next one, now we're talking about trains, right? When we talk about trains, we always like to think about locomotives, and we have a lot of locomotives, but this is probably the most important one, the CPR 2850, built in 1938. So really on the later end of steam engines here in Canada. Basically by 1950, steam engines are going to be out of service here in Canada, but this one is super important because in 1939, so the same year that World War II started, King George VI and Queen Elizabeth, mother, so the grandparents. I always say the parents of the current queen, but that's, I'm passé now. So the grandparents of the current King of England, they came to Canada and did a transcontinental trip. And it was the locomotive 2850 that pulled the Royal train from Montreal, or from Quebec City, actually, all the way to Vancouver, except for a little passage, which was another locomotive. And this locomotive, it was very important for the King of England at the time, this trip. He was very nervous. Obviously, World War II was about to start. Everyone saw it coming, basically. And so he was really able to relax because of this trip. And a little known fact about King George VI is that he was a rail fan. He very much enjoyed trains, and he would ride in the cabin of this locomotive, in the spot of the engineer, because he just loved the technology behind locomotives. And so after the trip, the Canadian Pacific asked him if they could rename this locomotive, these locomotives, which were known as the Hudson series, and they became known as the Royal Hudsons. And locomotive 2850 was, if I'm not mistaken, it was the first locomotive not in the UK that was given a royal title. But don't quote me on that because my memory is a bit fogged, but I believe so. It's the first, or one of the first ones at least. So yeah. Other railway vehicles that we have here at the at Exporail, we collect streetcars. We have a lot of streetcars, streetcars which were in operation in Montreal all the way up until 1959, and then they were replaced by buses and the subway system. And we have the streetcar that I'm showing you, the number 350. That's actually the first electric streetcar to run in Montreal. So it dates from 1892, and it was called the Rocket because people thought that it went fast. It was actually the accelerator company that built it, and then they named it the Rocket because it could go faster than a horse, or at least a horse pulling a buggy. So that was the, we're very happy to have that streetcar in our collection. And in the image, we don't see it very well, but there's another little yellow streetcar behind it, number 274, which is actually the second streetcar to run in Montreal. So we have the first two in our collection. And that other vehicle that you see, I don't know if any of you know what it is. I'm sure that some of you do. It is a rotary snowplow. So here in Canada, especially in the mountains, we get a lot of snow, or at least we did before climate change is ruining our ski seasons here. But we needed, at least in the time, we needed rotary snowplows that would remove the snow from in front of the trains. And curiously enough, it's actually an Ontarian dentist that would invent the rotary snowplow. So I'm not quite sure what he was doing in the mouths of his patients, but I'm glad not to be his patient. I don't know. But rotary snowplows, very, very important in the development and expansion of Canadian railways. So that's basically an overview of the most important vehicles that we have as part of our collections. But Exporail is a lot more than just its railway vehicles. We also have an archival center. And as a partner of Exporail's educational and cultural vocation, the center's extensive collection of archives and books is a natural part of the development with Exporail's mission. And therefore, we acquire and preserve archives, books, magazines, photographs, and any type of document from Canada, and also foreign documents as well, as part of our collection. As of last year, we have over 1 million iconographic documents, over 200,000 maps and drawings, over 360 hours of sound recordings, over 4,000 hours of film, and over 12,000 books, which makes our archival center the largest private archive center in Canada. And it was recognized in 2008 by the Bibliothèque et Archives Nationales du Québec, which is the provincial archive center, saying that that our archives are actually quite impressive and important to the preservation of Canadian railway history. But Exporail is a lot more than collections and archives. We are what we call ourselves a living museum. So we have a functioning streetcar ride, a functioning miniature train ride, a functioning steam engine demonstration, turntable demonstrations, and passenger train. So this, I just want to show you a few images. These are our two, we actually have three. I didn't show the third one because it's not as nice. We have two running streetcars, electric streetcars. The one on the left dates from 1928. The one on the right dates from 1923, I believe. Maybe a little later, maybe 1925. And both are functioning streetcars that have been restored in the past by our volunteers that make them operational to the public. So the public does have access and are able to take an authentic streetcar ride. And we are the only location in Canada, in Quebec, that offers a streetcar ride and an authentic streetcar. We also have our miniature train ride. So that's probably the favorite activity for our families that come and visit us. We operate it during the summer and during the winter. So in 35 degrees during the summer and negative 35 in the winter, we operate it. And it's an actual scaled locomotive. It's a G-scale diesel engine that we run, and we're able to do little train rides, and obviously the families really love that. So the photo that I have there is our steam engine. So it's that one's actually a replica. It's not real. It dates from 1971, and it's a replica of a steam engine that rolled here in Canada that was called the John Molson, and it dates from, the John Molson was from 1851. Ours dates from 1971, but again, we're the only railway museum in Quebec that operates a live steam engine that you can see in operation. We also have our turntable that I showed earlier in that panoramic view. So our turntable is a manual turntable, which is not too bad. We can easily push it. But when you put a 50-ton or 70-ton locomotive on it, it starts to get a little hard pushing that turntable. But it is a fun demonstration to do for the public. They're able to see and learn and actually participate. We actually allow our public to turn that turntable with us. So that's also a fun little activity that we do with the public. And then we have our passenger train, where this is a diesel engine. We have a few diesel engines that are operational, and we have passenger cars where visitors are able to take a train ride. It's only about 20-minute train ride. But all of these together, when you put all of these together, you know, the streetcar ride, the miniature train ride, the John Molson, the turntable, and the passenger train, there's quite a bit of movement going on at our site, which means that we need to be very vigilant because an accident is very fast to happen. So we really need to be careful when it comes to our railway movements. We also do, like I was saying, vehicle restoration, which the public can see. So the image that we have on our right, this was a vehicle that was in our main pavilion that needed some pretty intense sorry, I said right. I mean on the left. It's in our main pavilion. So the public was able to see the progress of the restoration. So this restoration took about a year to complete, the exterior renovation of the vehicle. And as the public would come, 2-3 times during the year, as if they had a pass, they would be able to see the progression of the restoration. And these restorations that are completely done by volunteers. So very, very vital to the success of Exporail. And again, well, on the right, we have another restoration job. This time it was done in the workshop. So you can see the guy that's completely dressed in basically a plastic suit, who's painting the vehicle. Again, all volunteers that are doing this work. So where are we going? Now I've showed you what Exporail is, where we came from, where we are. Where are we going? And this is what we call Exporail Project 2.0. We're not very original with our names when you come to think about it. One of our projects that we're putting into motion this summer is the rail bike that you see to the left. So we acquired that over the past year. Ours is not exactly like that, but it looks pretty similar. So this is going to be another addition to the living museum aspect that we want to create, this environment where people are really surrounded and are able to participate in their learning. And so this is a little rail bike, so that you could do a little bit of exercise as you roll the rails around our site. But another project that's going on that we're really looking forward to is we're actually transforming a railway vehicle into a passenger car for our steam engine. So not only will we have the only steam engine functioning in Quebec, but we will also have the only steam engine ride, where people will be able to ride behind the steam engine on our site. So this vehicle is being completely built from scratch by our volunteers in the workshop. So it's a 2-year process that they're going to be going through to restore, to build this vehicle. And what's probably the most impressive part about this vehicle is that it will be accessible to people that are in a situation of handicap. So if they're in a wheelchair, for example, they will be able to embark on this vehicle. It will have a little elevator installed on it to allow access. But more than just the vehicles that we're going to be building or allowing the public to interact with, we're also going to be expanding the museum. And we're basically going to be doubling our exhibition space for railway vehicles, which will have various other consequences, positive consequences, for the collection of railway vehicles. For example, the preservation of these vehicles, that some of them are still outside or in hangars, which are in less than ideal conditions. So that's going to be a lot of good. We do have challenges though. Exporail, just like any other railway museum, has challenges. And one of our biggest challenges is our geographical location. Like I said, we're not situated in Montreal. So clients, visitors need to have a vehicle to have access to us. Even public transportation is iffy at best. So our geographical location really does hurt us, and we do have to do a lot of publicity and a lot of marketing to try to attract visitors to us. Another one is our accessibility. It goes in hand with our geographical location, but also I want to stress that especially in North America, or at least in North America, especially here in Canada over the past, say, 10, 15 years, there's been a lot of discussion about universal accessibility in museums. And that's something that we would like to get involved with, making our museum as accessible as possible to people in a situation of handicap. However, we are constrained by the simple nature of our museum, railway vehicles built in the 1800s or early 1900s were simply not built for visitors in a wheelchair. And we can't transform our vehicles, our historic vehicles, to allow that. So that is a little bit of a challenge and a constraint that we have. As I was mentioning earlier, the conservation of our vehicles, right? Some of our vehicles are still outside or in an outdoor hangar, so less than ideal conservation conditions with humidity, little animals, insects, stuff like that. They do cause a lot of damage to our vehicles. Human resources. As I was mentioning, volunteers at Exporail are vital to our success. We have volunteers that have been volunteering for 60 years at the museum. The average age of our volunteers is about 75 years old. which we have to be honest with ourselves. They're on the, they're not as young as they once were. They still have a lot of heart and they want to participate just as much. But unfortunately, there are some limitations that arise with our volunteers of a certain age. And of course, our financing. And this is a problem that, I mean, most of you probably know about. Financing in museums, unless you're a national museum or you have very big donors behind, is always difficult. So that's where I'm going to end my presentation. I kind of ended on a sad note with all our challenges, but we are overcoming these challenges. We're constantly consistently working to overcome these challenges and to find solutions. That's what I get paid to do, and I love it. It's a very good challenge, and I think that I'm up to the challenge. But if you want more information, don't hesitate to check us out at exporail.org. And we have a bunch of information on our site. And if ever you want to contact me for more information or questions or whatnot, or just, whatever, don't hesitate. Send me an email at education@exporail.com. It'll be my pleasure to be able to respond and have a conversation with you. It's always a pleasure to speak with other railway enthusiasts. So, I think I was within my time, 30 minutes or so.
Yeah, you were. Thanks, Matthew. There are a few questions. I mean, we will just take a few questions.
Yeah, no problem.
Kind enough to answer. There were some questions on the volunteering program. You have, 21,000 hours of work being done annually by the volunteers.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you motivate the volunteers? Because that's an issue we face a lot here in the national museums here back in this country, the motivation and the challenge when it comes to volunteering.
That's actually a good question. This is going to sound weird. We don't have a problem motivating our volunteers. It's a problem because they're actually too motivated and they're doing things that they shouldn't be doing. And you're like, they're 80 years old and climbing on the roof of a locomotive because they want to repaint it. And you're like, well, you should be wearing a harness. No, we don't need to wear a harness. And it's like, well, maybe we should. So we don't have a problem motivating the volunteers that we have. The problem that we do have is recruiting new volunteers, right? And so what we end up doing is we're doing an outreach program right now where we are recruiting volunteers based on specific needs. So say we need a welder. Well, we'll try to find a retired welder that's looking to, get out of his house and whatnot. And then we're like, hey, we have a little project that we would like that we need a welder on. We see that you were a welder in your past career. Would you be interested in coming and working, on a small project? It's going to take 5-10 hours. And a lot of times they say, yeah, why not? I mean, for, a day, 2 days of work, I'll come in and I'll, show you a little bit of what I have. And oftentimes this has generated more volunteerism on their behalf because they volunteer. We try to create a welcoming environment. They feel welcome, they like it, and they start giving a little bit more time. And that's really how we've been getting our volunteers for the past, say, 10 years or so. We've been, really digging into these niche markets of professions, trying to get people to come in and volunteer, which means that they're not always rail enthusiasts, right? A welder is not necessarily a rail enthusiast, but he likes welding. So if you're able to get him, willing to weld for you, and then he comes and works at the museum, he works in the workshop with a bunch of other volunteers that, have different backgrounds, it becomes basically a social club. And that's basically what we're selling here at Exporail is that, if you become a volunteer, you acquire a whole new group of friends at the museum.
Yeah, that's nice. See, in 2020, you got the Canadian Museum's Volunteer Award. Can you talk something about the award that the museum won in 2020?
Yeah, so yeah, we won the the Canadian Museum Association Volunteer Award. And it's the calculation of that is based on the number of hours that volunteers commit to the museum. So we have over 140 volunteers at our museum. So we have a large number of volunteers, and they do a variety of tasks. And that also counts for us, right? We have volunteers that are volunteer tour guides. We have volunteers that work for the Canadian Rail, that magazine that we publish. We have volunteers that are on the board of administration and, you know, developing the future of the museum. We have volunteer modelists, you know, that build model trains for us. We have volunteers that work in the workshop, so that are, you know, carpenters, that are welders, that are ex-train locomotive engineers that come and drive locomotives for us. We have ex-pilots. We have a wide variety of volunteers, and they do a wide variety of tasks. And Exporail could not function without volunteers, without our 140 so volunteers. And so just by the sheer commitment that they have towards Exporail and the amount of time that they devote to the museum, it enabled us, well, to win this award that we're very, very proud of. And it was a very big sign of recognition for the volunteers as well. When we told our volunteers that we had won this award, it was, they wore it like a patch of pride, almost, of like going around and like, yeah, I contributed to Exporail winning this award. And so, yeah, that it was really, really a nice sign of recognition of our volunteers to win that award.
Okay. So you have a lot of education programs running, which makes the museum, you know, a part of the community that exists there. There is a preschool, daycare, day camps, secondary school groups program. So can you briefly tell us about how you are integrating the children and the school community as a part of this entire experience at Exporail?
Yeah, absolutely. We receive over, on average, pre-COVID, if we're talking, we were receiving about 160 schools in a year, or school, or at least schools, daycares, you know, tour groups. And so it's a very big part of our visitors. And we actually, one of the people that we single out for our student guides are students that are in university to become teachers. It's a very good experience for them to become tour guides, to be talking in front of groups. And so they obviously have a very good knowledge of the educational program, or the provincial educational program. And so I'm able to work in coordination with these students to develop programs that really match the pedagogical needs and standards of the provincial government. And when you're really able to match the requirements, and schools look at your program and they're like, well, we want something that matches, you know, the provincial requirements. And you're like, well, look, this is what I have, and this is how I meet all of these standards. They really do appreciate that. But we also have an unfair advantage. Our miniature railway, our streetcar, man, those are good sellers. We're able to attract a lot of people just, you know, because we're able to offer those train rides. Okay.
I'll just take one more question and then we wrap up the session. This is a question from Manikandan. He asks, can you let us know why Mr. Charles Hayes wanted to meet Bruce Ismay of White Star? Did he want to link his railway with the shipping line?
That's a good question. So Charles Melville Hayes was working for the Grand Trunk Canada section, but Grand Trunk was actually a British company. So the general headquarters were actually in England. So in 1912, he went to England to meet with the big president of Grand Trunk. And this big president was friends with Joseph Bruce Ismay. So that's how they met. With relation to his shipping line, Charles Melville Hayes followed everything that was the development of technology. So railways, shipping lines, industrial revolution. He was very, very much in touch with all of this. So much so, I'll give a little anecdote while we're here. I'll take the minute. When the Canadian Pacific built the Transcontinental Railway, they ended their lines in Vancouver, which was the natural stopping ground on the Pacific Ocean. Charles Melville Hayes, when he's going to build the Grand Trunks Transcontinental Railway, he's going to bring his railway line all the way up to Prince Rupert, which is about a 17-hour drive north of Vancouver. And people were calling him absolutely crazy. Why are you bringing your railways all the way up there? It makes absolutely no sense. But Charles Melville Hayes, with regard to shipping lines, he saw it coming. He saw that shipping boats were going to get bigger and bigger, like a little bit like trains, right? A little bit like locomotives. And so he brought his railway lines all the way up to Prince Rupert. Prince Rupert, one, is 1 day closer to Asian markets by boat. And the port is actually a lot deeper than the one in Vancouver. Vancouver is not a deep port. So what happens? In 2023, so 125 years after the construction of this railway, most shipping lines coming in from, say, South Korea, from Japan, from China, are passing through Prince Rupert and not Vancouver. So they're using these lines that Charles Melville Hayes built back in the late 1800s, early 1900s, that people were calling him crazy. And now today, these rails are the most used rails in Canada. So he was very much in touch with what was going on in the shipping, in the boat shipping industry. And then going back to the beginning, that's how he met Joseph Bruce Ismay, was through the bigger president of Grand Trunk. So a little bit of a history going around there, but yeah, it wasn't just a coincidence that he met them, that they were important people in different industries that were going in the same direction.
That's a fascinating anecdote. I mean, talks about a visionary. So there is a lot of praise, Matthew, for your presentations. I will just pull all of it together and share it with you on a Word file later today. And thanks for joining us and sharing an excellent presentation. There was a lot of learnings for us here for the museum scene here in the country. We have a lot of administrators in the top positions who are there, the part of this conference. So there will be a lot of messaging for them as well as for the volunteers here. Thanks. It was an interesting presentation, and thanks, Matthew, for finding out time to join us. Thank you.
It was my absolute pleasure, and I wish you nothing but the best moving forward with this conference. I'm sure that it's going to be very educational, very informative, and it was my pleasure to be able to participate and share a little bit of my knowledge with you guys.